Krellix hunched in the makeshift bunker, his chitinous plating tinged the color of the desert sand. The outpost was eerily quiet, the humans' usual boisterous shouts replaced by a taut, watchful silence. He glanced at Specialist Ramirez, the human medic hunkered beside him, and saw a reflection of his own apprehension in her dark eyes. "Remember the first day you got here, Doc?" Sergeant Jake's voice, usually a booming force of nature, crackled over the comms, laced with tension. "I told you, you ain't seen nothing yet." Krellix shuddered, not from the desert chill, but from the memory. He hadn't been a battlefield medic long, and Verilian tactics emphasized precision and minimizing casualties. Yet, in the weeks since being unceremoniously dumped on this desolate rock, he'd patched up more wounds than in the entirety of his previous career. Humans pushed their bodies to the brink, and then promptly pushed them past it, chuckling in the face of near-fatal injuries. Reckless, unpredictable, medically incomprehensible, he'd muttered to himself, patching up plasma burns while dodging enemy fire. Back then, Krellix had been convinced these illogical bipeds would get themselves and himself killed. Then came the battle that changed everything. Outgunned and outmatched by a disciplined enemy force, the humans hadn't fallen back. Instead, they'd used their intimate knowledge of the wasteland to ambush, outsmart, and demoralize their attackers. That's when he'd begun to understand. Recklessness wasn't the sole explanation. There was a strange, ruthless brilliance to these humans. They used chaos like a weapon, each move fueled by a ferocious will to protect their own. And Krellix was no longer just their medic. He'd studied them, learned their slang, and even felt something akin to grudging admiration for their defiant spirit. "Incoming!" Jake's voice barked a warning, jolting Krellix back to the grim present. Intelligence reports were grim. Their guerrilla tactics had enraged the larger enemy faction, drawing massive retaliation. The same human ingenuity that had won them unlikely victories now had a bullseye painted firmly on their backs. 30 hostiles are inbound, tanks and heavy weapons. This isn't a raid, Doc, Jake snarled. This is payback, and they brought enough firepower to flatten this sand dune. Ramirez let out a soft curse. "We're sitting ducks here, Sarge. They outnumber us 3-1. "That's why we won't just sit," Jake replied, and Krellix heard the ghost of a grin in his voice. "It's time to show 'em why you never corner a pack of wolves." A tremor ran through the ground, growing into a rhythmic thunder that sent chills down even Krellix's segmented spine. The humans around him exchanged grim, determined glances. This wasn't about playing the underdog anymore. This was a fight for survival. And if Krellix had learned anything, it was that humans didn't do survival quietly. "Here they come!" Private Rodriguez's shout was barely audible over the roar of approaching enemy armor. The first tank crested the dune, its weapons turrets swiveling ominously. Krellix expected the humans to fire, desperately unleashing a barrage of salvaged and jury-rigged weaponry. Instead, the outpost remained silent. The stillness stretched unbearably, broken only by the relentless advance of the enemy. "What's the plan?" he hissed to Ramirez, whose knuckles were white on her rifle grip. "Plan?" She grinned, a feral flash of teeth. "Chaos, Doc. Beautiful, glorious chaos." Then it began. A repurposed mining drill whined into life, spitting dirt and stones in a blinding spray. Scavenged from a derelict freighter, a spotlight blazed into the first tank's viewports, blinding its crew. Smoke billowed from seemingly nowhere, choking and acrid, the humans using sand, scavenged fuel, anything that would disorient and confuse. The enemy, expecting the humans' usual hit-and-run tactics, was caught off guard. Their tanks lurched, unsure, their sensors overloaded, and their formation crumbling. And that's when the humans struck. "For the outpost!" Jake's roar shattered the artificial silence, echoing across the dunes. They poured from hiding with a ferocity Krellix was becoming accustomed to, but still found jarring. But this time, there was a grim method, precision amidst the madness. Explosives, cleverly timed and positioned, targeted not the tanks themselves, but the treads and the sand around them, anything to immobilize the heavily armored beasts. The humans darted among the lumbering giants like angry insects, wielding weapons that defied logic. One soldier used what looked like a mining laser, its beam somehow slicing into tank armor. Another used EMP burst from cobbled-together confiscated tech, knocking enemy weapon systems offline. Krellix, driven by some instinct he didn't fully understand, sprinted onto the battlefield. He was there to heal, but today he also knew the best way to save his patients was to give them the chance to fight. He dodged explosions, ducking debris and treating wounds in the dust-choked air. His normally pristine medkit was filthy, and his supplies were depleted at an alarming rate. Still, he worked with a speed and focus he'd never thought possible. The infuriating, impossible humans fought like a single entity, their battle cries not boasting, but roaring of defiance against impossible odds. Krellix saw Ramirez shimmy beneath an enemy personnel carrier, only to emerge moments later, dragging a wounded soldier to safety while firing her pistol. Private Johnson, seemingly half-blinded by a plasma burst, was lifted and carried by two of his comrades, yet still, somehow, managed to aim and fire his battered weapon. Sergeant Jake Jackson's presence blazed like a beacon everywhere. He directed, battled, and inspired, all with a grim joy that echoed the strange thrill Krellix now felt thrumming through his veins. This was the battleground the medic was meant for, not the sterile bays of a Verilian cruiser, but here, in the desperate symphony of grit and determination. The first enemy wave lay in disarray, full of immobilized tanks, smoking craters, and the scattered wreckage of personnel carriers. The battered and sweat-soaked humans let out a ragged cheer that quickly faded as their eyes turned towards a new crest of the unforgiving desert horizon. "Well, damn," Private Rodriguez muttered, wiping a streak of blood from his grin. "Looks like round 2 just showed up to the party." Jake's expression hardened. "Fall back," he barked, his voice hoarse. "Defensive positions, conserve ammo. Doc, get the wounded back to the shelter." A fresh surge of fear coursed through Krellix. There were dozens of more enemy troops advancing steadily, seemingly unfazed by the carnage before them. He'd patched up his comrades, but another battle loomed so quickly that many wouldn't survive a second fight. Desperation fueled his movements. He worked beside Ramirez, hauling back the injured with a strength he didn't know he possessed. Each warrior they dragged back was one more who could fight, one more chance to hold out. Inside the makeshift bunker, the wounded moaned and gasped for breath. His supplies were catastrophically depleted. Bandages were now crude strips torn from uniforms, and painkillers were down to a handful of salvaged pills. "We ain't gonna make it, Doc," Ramirez gasped, her movements slower, exhaustion finally catching up. As despair threatened to overwhelm him, Krellix's gaze fell on the scattered enemy vehicles. The first wave had thought they were cornering them and had been careless in their advance. An idea, reckless and born of necessity, flickered in his mind. "Jake!" he spat, scrambling through the bunker's entrance back onto the battlefield. The sergeant was rallying the remaining humans in a grim line of defiance against the oncoming wave. "Doc?" Jake's eyes widened in alarm. "It would behoove you to get your shell back inside and help the others." "We can use their supplies, their equipment," Krellix insisted. "I know their tech. I can—" Jake cut him off, but there was a calculating gleam in his eye. "You sure, Doc?" "It's our only chance," Krellix said. Medicine wasn't just about healing anymore. It was making the impossible possible, like his human comrades. Jake barked a series of orders, erupting a whirlwind of movement around Krellix. Humans darted into the open, not to attack but to scavenge. They hauled salvaged medkits, makeshift energy cells, and anything that could be repurposed. Krellix himself ran, heedless of the blaster fire now whizzing around him, yanking vital components from damaged tanks and familiarizing himself with their layout with surprising speed. The enemy, confused by this suicidal scavenging mission, faltered momentarily. That moment was all the humans needed. They retreated, hauling precious supplies and dragging Krellix back to cover. Within the outpost, a new kind of frenzy commenced. Humans adopted enemy medkits, learning on the fly the basics of a different species' medical tech, all under Krellix's tense instructions. They recharged weapons with salvaged energy cells and modified captured grenades, each crude adaptation buying them precious time. The second enemy wave advanced, more cautious this time, but the humans, instead of being broken and depleted, met them with a renewed ferocity fueled by stolen supplies and perhaps a desperate, reckless hope. Krellix had never imagined a battlefield as a place of frantic innovation, yet there he was, applying battlefield medicine and frantically adapting enemy medical tech. Humans surrounded him, watching with an intensity that unnerved him until he remembered that lives depended on his knowledge. "Their wound sealant?" he rasped, pointing at a scavenged kit. "It's chemically inert and can be used on humans short term." He trailed off, then pointed. "Break that down, the powder. That's their equivalent of our coagulant. It slows blood loss but needs precise application." Human hands moved with surprising delicacy, following his instructions. But even with their boosted supplies, the battle was a desperate struggle. It was a war of attrition against a more numerous, better-equipped force. There were too many incoming wounded, and Krellix was reaching the limits of his endurance. Amidst the chaos, Jake found him, a fresh gash across his face. "Doc, we've got to fall back further," the sergeant gritted out. "Prep those who can move." Krellix looked around at his makeshift infirmary. Too many humans lay sprawled beyond his ability to help. A sense of despair threatened to overwhelm him, but then one of the wounded, barely more than a boy, groaned and weakly gave him a defiant thumbs up. "No," Krellix said, and something in his voice made even Jake pause. "Every step back is another step closer to them overrunning us completely. We hold here. Doc, I ain't gonna leave our wounded as sitting targets." "Then we take them with us," Krellix snapped, Verilian pragmatism rising amidst the human madness. "Those who can fight, cover our retreat. We booby-trap this place, slow their advance." Jake stared at him, a strange mix of respect and incredulity in his eyes. Then he grinned, a flash of teeth in his bloodied face. "Damn, Doc, I knew you had it in you. All right, let's give these bastards a parting gift they won't forget." What followed was controlled chaos. It was the kind the humans somehow excelled at. The humans fought a vicious rearguard action, each salvaged grenade, each burst of blaster fire buying precious time. Krellix treated and moved the injured, dragging them into a rough semblance of cover in a further outpost section. Specialist Ramirez, her own arm in a crude sling, rigged enemy munitions as booby traps, her grin both feral and oddly competent. When the last retreating human triggered the final trap, a series of deafening explosions echoed through the dunes. The outpost, which had come to symbolize tenacity and improbable survival, was irrevocably changed, a smoldering testament to their defiance. The ragged column of humans and their determined medic staggered onward, deeper into the unforgiving desert. Krellix looked back at the smoke billowing behind them, a mix of grief and grim pride twisting in his thorax. He had come here to study battlefield medicine. He'd gotten an unforgettable education in the art of impossible survival. The desert stretched before them, an endless canvas of shimmering sand. Their uniforms were dust-caked, their faces etched with exhaustion, and every step was an agonizing effort. Krellix staggered alongside the humans, his segmented legs better suited to this unforgiving environment than their bipedal frames. However, even Verilian endurance had its limits. Each hour, he forced a rotation to stop and treat injuries that worsened with every mile. Blisters bloomed into open wounds. Sunburn reddened exposed skin. Dehydration gnawed at their strength, and Krellix's meager supplies of water and electrolytes dwindled at a terrifying rate. He dispensed his knowledge of Verilian desert survival techniques, but humans seemed almost perversely determined to overheat and dehydrate at an alarming pace. Yet, even when swaying on their feet, their defiance never wavered. "Come on, Doc. Can't you whip up one of those fancy Verilian field energizer thingies?" Private Johnson wheezed, his usual brashness muted by exhaustion. "My species evolved on a temperate world, Private," Krellix snapped back, though his mandibles twitched in what might have been a semblance of a smile. "My fancy thingies are currently inside that burning pile of rubble we used to call an outpost." Jake, overhearing them, let out a hoarse laugh. "Don't worry, Doc. We'll build you a new one. Bigger, badder, with twice the cobbled-together defenses." The medic felt a surge of warmth and a strange possessiveness over this battered troop and their ruined home. He was no longer a Verilian observer, but one of them. Night fell, and the desert chill starkly contrasted with the day's heat. But instead of rest, it brought a new danger. The temperature plummeted, and with it, several of the humans started showing early signs of hypothermia. "Damn sandblasted hellhole," Ramirez muttered, teeth chattering. She huddled with the youngest of the group, sharing meager body heat. Krellix, programmed for different conditions, felt an ache far worse than the physical cold. He felt the frustration of useless knowledge. "There's no vegetation for insulation, and our meager supplies won't start a sustainable fire," he hissed. Then, Private Rodriguez, who was slumped against a rock, let out a low cry of surprise. "Doc, I think I found something." He held up something that glinted in the starlight. Krellix scuttled over, hope igniting. It was a thin sheet of material, torn but with an odd sheen. "Plasteel insulation," he breathed, recognizing it from a derelict supply drone they'd scavenged weeks earlier. A grin split Rodriguez's face. Maybe that bot crashed carrying more than mining tools. Within minutes, the humans, with renewed energy, were scouring the area. Their luck held. They unearthed more of the insulation, enough to create makeshift shelters held in place with scavenged rocks. They huddled close, sharing warmth inefficiently but effectively. Krellix, reluctantly accepting he couldn't help, retreated a short distance to keep watch, Verilian eyes adjusting to the darkness. Sleep was impossible, not from the cold but from the knowledge that every hour they rested was an hour their enemy could close the distance. As the first gray hints of dawn touched the sky, Krellix stirred the humans from their shallow slumber. They continued their desperate trek, the sun beating down on them once more. Krellix knew it might be the end of his comrades the next time they stopped. Yet, as the hours passed, he saw no faltering in their steps, no dimming of their defiance. If anything, their determination seemed to burn brighter, fueled by the same strange fire that had first shocked and now endlessly fascinated him. Days blurred into an endless cycle of scorching heat and biting chill. Their salvaged supplies were beyond depleted, and the humans subsisted on meager rations of scavenged desert flora, such as roots and bitter leaves, anything to stave off the gnawing hunger and constant thirst. Krellix had supplemented their diet with his knowledge of edible insects, a necessity the humans initially faced with disgust, then grudging acceptance, and eventually even grim jokes. They collapsed into exhausted heaps each night, huddling for warmth under the shimmering expanse of stars. Yet, in the pre-dawn hours, Krellix would always find a pair of eyes open, a lone human on watch, their silhouette stark against the horizon. This unspoken vigilance, this refusal to ever fully surrender even to exhaustion, stirred something deep within him. One morning, as they crested yet another barren dune, a flicker of green caught Krellix's compound eye. "Hold," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. Humans froze and weapons were raised. "There," Krellix pointed to a thin, segmented limb. "Vegetation. That density, it—" His voice trailed off, a surge of alien hope rising in his thorax. An oasis? A hidden water source? They advanced cautiously, weapons lowered but senses on high alert. Krellix was in the lead now. His Verilian physiology rendered him less susceptible to false hope and the delirious mirages whispered in desert survival manuals. As they drew closer, the patch of green resolved into a tangle of low-growing, thorny bushes. It was hardly a paradise, but undeniably a sign of life. "Berries," Private Rodriguez whispered, his eyes wide. "Doc, can we eat those?" Krellix examined one of the waxy-looking fruits, his mandibles twitching as his antennae tested the air. "Unfamiliar, but no obvious signs of toxins. Proceed with caution," he declared, his clinical tone at odds with the desperate hope coursing through them. The humans devoured the berries, their groans of pleasure almost obscene after days of deprivation. The fruits were bitter, barely palatable, but filled with life-giving moisture. Krellix ate sparingly, analyzing the effects on the humans before indulging more fully himself. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to renew their march, their steps a little lighter. Krellix, moving ahead to scout, saw it first. A rugged, winding crack cutting through the desolate landscape. A canyon. It might offer shelter, camouflage, and with improbable luck, perhaps even a hidden water source. He signaled the others, unable to hide his eagerness in his movements. The humans, seeing the change in terrain, let out ragged cheers. They clambered down into the canyon's depths, the shadows a balm to their scorched skin. The canyon floor was rocky and dry, but as they followed its winding path, a startling sound echoed ahead, the unmistakable rush of water. They stumbled forward, hope turning into a frantic desperation. Krellix, reaching the bend in the canyon first, let out a startled cry that was both triumph and a strange echo of despair. There was water, a trickle emerging from a crack in the rock face, forming a shallow, muddy pool. But surrounding it were bones, dozens of them, the skeletal remains of desert creatures, large and small, picked clean by scavengers. A wave of unease washed over the humans, their burst of optimism dampened by the grim sight. "Damn," Private Johnson breathed. "Something ain't right about this place." Sergeant Jake, however, crouched at the edge of the pool, scooping up a handful of muddy water. "It could be old kills," he grunted, squinting at the liquid. "Or whatever lives here already drank and moved on." Ramirez, ever the realist, snorted. "Yeah, or maybe whatever did the drinking is still around, just waiting for another meal to wander in." Krellix stepped forward, his healer's instincts overriding the apprehension that prickled at his carapace. Analyzing the remains, he frowned. "Predatory," he murmured. "The bone structure suggests a large, carnivorous species, likely territorial, and drawn to an accessible water source like this one." Jake's hand stilled, the water dripping through his fingers. "So we've got ourselves a watering hole with a side of man-eating monster. It just gets better and better, doesn't it, Doc?" Despite the dire circumstances, Jake's voice crackled with a familiar surge of defiance. But the humans around him were uncharacteristically hesitant, their eyes scanning the shadows nervously. For the first time, Krellix saw a flicker of true fear in their indomitable spirits. "We rest, quickly," the sergeant finally decided. "We need water, but we need to do this smart. Watch rotation, fill canteens, then retreat a safe distance. If anything nasty comes sniffing around, we fight on our terms, not theirs." They moved with practiced efficiency, born of countless similar scrapes with death. Krellix treated minor injuries, handing out the last of the scavenged painkillers. The canyon provided a sliver of cover, but the knowledge of a potential lurking predator cast a pall over their meager respite. As Krellix filled his canteen, a flicker of movement in the canyon wall caught his eye. He pinpointed the source with a precision honed by thousands of battlefield autopsies. It was a narrow, almost imperceptible crevice, not an escape route, but a potential hiding place, and something within that crevice moved. "Sergeant," he started, then fell silent. The air crackled as Jake emerged from the shadows, an unspoken question in his eyes. Instead of answering, Krellix lifted a hand, pointing towards the crevice. Jake tensed, his gaze following Krellix's gesture. Just for an instant, the faintest glimmer reflected in the depths, a flash of reptilian yellow. They exchanged a silent look, a chilling understanding passing between them. This wasn't about mere survival anymore. This was a hunter's den, and they were the prey. Jake didn't question Krellix, a testament to the unusual trust forged between them. A quick series of hand signals relayed the situation. A confirmed predator of unknown size or capabilities, likely observing them. The humans moved with a chilling, silent efficiency that sent a shiver down Krellix's segmented spine. This wasn't bravado. It was the practiced calm of a cornered animal preparing for the fight of its life. They retreated uphill, positioning themselves on the canyon rim, using the terrain to their only advantage: height. Below, the watering hole lay deceptively still. Krellix focused on the crevice, straining to detect movement within the shadows. "Can't just sit here and wait for it to get hungry, Sarge," Ramirez whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustle of dry brush. Jake nodded, his gaze flicking between the watering hole and the crevice. "We need bait," he murmured. Krellix stiffened. He knew human battle tactics could be unpredictable, but this plan went beyond risk. It was a calculated gamble with their lives. "Rodriguez," Jake whispered, beckoning the private forward. Krellix felt a surge of protest, the Verilian medical code screaming at him to prevent unnecessary endangerment. But Private Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Oh, Sarge, just get me close enough to drop this," he said, hefting a salvaged grenade, a crude thing cobbled together from enemy ordnance. A plan began to form in Krellix's mind, a horrifyingly dangerous one that played precisely to the human's recklessness. "Do not detonate it too close to the crevice," he hissed. "We want it injured, enraged, and drawn away from its lair." Rodriguez gave him a lopsided grin that bordered on feral. "Affirmative, Doc." The detonation was crude, the explosion sending rocks tumbling and echoing through the silent canyon. Moments later, something monstrous erupted from the crevice. For a heart-stopping second, all Krellix registered was the absurdness, as the beast was far more significant in size than he'd anticipated. Its scaled hide was the color of sun-baked sand. Then it charged, not towards the fleeing soldier, but straight for the watering hole. With clinical detachment, even in the face of overwhelming horror, he saw it in detail. An incredibly fast bipedal reptile with powerful hind legs and a mouth filled with needle-like teeth. It ripped into the skeletal remains with a ferocity that sent shards of bone flying, the sound nauseatingly like the cracking of Krellix's own chitinous plating. "Now!" Jake roared. As one, the humans opened fire. Blaster shots seared the air, mostly missing the agile creature or bouncing harmlessly off its thick hide. But the noise, the flashes of light, achieved their purpose. The monster, startled, swiveled its head to glare at the humans on the canyon rim. Then, it launched itself upwards, scaling the canyon wall with terrifying speed. "Fall back!" Jake's command was lost in the chaos that ensued. Humans scattered, scrambling to evade the creature that ascended the slope like a monstrous, sand-colored spider. Krellix, his instinct for self-preservation momentarily overridden, watched as it gained ground, fear spiking a metallic taste into his mouth. Then, something flashed silver in the sunlight. With a wild battle cry, Ramirez hurled herself down the slope, not retreating but countercharging. Krellix saw the monstrous reptilian eyes widen in a flicker of surprise. Ramirez slammed into the creature's shoulder first, the impact throwing them both off balance. The beast roared, momentarily disoriented. It was the opening Jake needed. With a burst of speed Krellix didn't know he possessed, the sergeant closed the distance in a few strides and unleashed a single, impossibly precise shot. The primitive blaster wasn't meant for killing a creature this size, but it found its mark. The beast howled, the sound echoing through the canyon as the blast seared its eye. Blinded on one side and enraged, it stumbled, momentarily forgetting the humans scrambling away from it. It charged off into the wasteland, a disoriented, shrieking blur of sand and scales. Relief crashed over Krellix in a wave, making his legs tremble. Around him, the humans were regrouping, breathing hard, some nursing minor injuries. Then, a lone figure staggered back from the canyon edge. Ramirez, covered in dust and blood, not all of it her own, sported a bandage hastily wrapped around a gripped arm. "Looks like my arm may need a sling again," she joked, producing a bloody grin at Krellix. And with a thrill of undeniable disbelief, he grinned back. In the aftermath of the encounter, Krellix found himself not on the periphery of the humans' actions, but at their center. His observations of their unique biology and rudimentary enemy technology translations proved invaluable. They used the creature's discarded scales from within the abandoned lair as makeshift armor, reinforcing their tattered gear. Krellix, drawing upon his medical knowledge, helped them extract a numbing agent from the creature's venomous saliva they found around the area. It was a crude but welcome addition to their ravaged medical supplies. As they trekked onward through the barren landscape, Krellix noticed a subtle shift in their dynamic. It wasn't deference, but an acknowledgement that he brought a different kind of strength to their desperate fight for survival. He was no longer just their medic, but an advisor, a translator of the deadly alien world around them. After hours of marching, they unknowingly stumbled upon what they believed to be a hidden settlement. Krellix's heightened senses detected movement within the seemingly abandoned structures. The humans, conditioned to expect an ambush, hung back, letting him be the point of first contact. The inhabitants were reclusive, their language unfamiliar, and their customs bordering on bizarre even by Krellix's standards. But they did not attack on sight. Instead, they observed the humans with wary fascination, their eyes lingering on the makeshift weapons and the jury-rigged armor pieced together from the wreckage of battle and beast scales. Negotiations were tense, hand gestures and halting translations conveying a mix of desperation and a threat barely held in check. But when Krellix displayed his healer's kit in a moment of unorthodox diplomacy, a strange understanding flickered in their eyes. It seemed that healers were a universally understood concept, a bridge across the gulf of species and circumstance. The settlement offered begrudging sanctuary, meager rations, a water source, and a sliver of tenuous safety. As the humans collapsed into exhausted slumber for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Krellix remained on watch. The settlement's inhabitants possessed knowledge of the desert, ancient maps, and navigational lore the humans desperately needed. The humans, in turn, possessed a ferocity that this sheltered, cautious people had perhaps long forgotten. Krellix saw the potential for an alliance, a strange symbiosis born from a crucible. But first, he had to convince the two parties of that. His role had shifted once more, from medic to advisor, and now to a reluctant diplomat. Jake found him later, as the first rays of dawn painted the crumbling structures in a pale light. The sergeant, as usual, seemed to materialize from the shadows, a silent testament to his ability to move unseen, even in this unfamiliar environment. "Well, Doc," Jake said, his grin tired but undeniably present, "things sure have a way of getting complicated around you." Krellix clicked his mandibles in what he hoped approximated a human sigh. "I assure you, Sergeant, complexity is a constant in my current circumstances." Do you think you can sweet-talk these folks into helping us? Jake's voice held a seriousness Krellix was becoming accustomed to. He admitted, "It will require unconventional methods, but I believe there is potential for a mutually beneficial exchange." Jake's grin turned positively hopeful. "Well then, Doc, let's give these desert dwellers a sales pitch they won't forget. Only the best for our resident alien negotiator." Krellix, looking out at the vast wasteland that had become his battlefield and at the battle-scarred humans who had become his unlikely comrades, felt a familiar thrill course through him. It wasn't the cold certainty of his Verilian training, but a defiant, reckless hope. Perhaps, amidst the madness, there was a chance for them all. Krellix's unconventional methods of diplomacy weren't what a traditional Verilian envoy would have approved of. They involved carefully staged demonstrations of the humans' salvaged weaponry, repurposed enemy tech spitting bursts of energy with more noise than accuracy, but undeniably visually impressive. Yet, it was the humans' own battle-worn bodies that proved most convincing. The healed blaster burns, crude splints, and scars in various stages of healing spoke volumes about their tenacity and their medics' unexpected skill. The settlement's elders, hesitant at first, began to see the humans with a new glint in their eyes, not as refugees, but as potential allies. They spoke of old sandstorms, shifting trade routes, and whispers of their enemies' movements in far-off sectors. In return, Jake, guided by Krellix's translations and surprising strategic insight, offered protection. It turned out that humans were exceptional deterrents, particularly when they looked at how Jake's unit held it together to survive the desert trek. They were ragged, undeniably dangerous, and fueled by a desperate protective energy that the sheltered settlers found unnerving and compelling. The alliance was as fragile as a desert bloom, born out of necessity rather than genuine trust. Yet, as days stretched into weeks, a strange rhythm emerged. Humans patrolled the settlement's crumbling perimeter, their senses sharp, instincts honed by constant peril. The settlement dwellers, in turn, shared their knowledge of the unforgiving terrain, the hidden pathways, and the survival strategies their ancestors had perfected over generations. In the evenings around meager campfires, a halting exchange of language and customs began. The humans' brash humor and tales of impossible victories shocked and sometimes amused the stoic desert folk. Krellix found himself bridging the gap, translating not just words but the underlying emotions, the shared fear, the stubborn resilience, and the flicker of a strange, desperate kind of kinship. His role expanded once more. He treated the injuries of both humans and settlement dwellers, wounds inflicted by the harsh environment and the occasional skirmish with opportunistic raiders. His knowledge of Verilian medicine, human physiology, and now the rudimentary healing techniques of this desert tribe made him uniquely invaluable. With every life saved, every relieved gasp, his position in this unlikely alliance solidified. Months passed, and one evening, as the twin moons cast long shadows, Krellix was summoned to the dwelling of the settlement's eldest. The ancient woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, offered him a cup filled with a bitter, steaming liquid. Krellix, no longer hesitant about trying strange concoctions, sipped it obediently. "It is the brew of warriors," the elder spoke, her voice a whisper as weathered as the sandstone of the surrounding ruins. "We have seen. You fight beside them, heal them, but you are not one of them." Krellix, having somewhat learned their language due to his alien intellect, held her gaze. "I am what this war has made me," he stated, "a healer bound to those who defy death itself." The woman's smile was a mere flicker, but held a grudging respect. "Perhaps, then, there is a place for you among the kindred of sand and stars." She gestured to the cup, and to Krellix's surprise, he felt a surge of starkly, undeniably gratitude. He took another sip. It tasted of survival, resilience, and perhaps finally belonging. As time passed, the hot desert wind eventually brought them news. Their enemy was mobilizing. It was not scattered raiding parties anymore, but a coordinated force. It was the retaliation they had both feared and expected. While a welcome respite, the settlement was never meant to be their final stand. Jake, now sporting a crude eye patch crafted from salvaged plasteel, and looking every bit the hardened desert raider, called a council consisting of humans and alien settlement dwellers alike, huddled amidst the windswept ruins. Krellix found himself at the center of it, not as a mere translator, but as a strategist. He outlined the information gleaned from intercepted communications and scout reports, overlaying his initial Verilian analysis with humans' uncanny ability to predict the enemy's aggression. "They won't be expecting what we've got now," Jake growled, his remaining eye glinting coldly. "We hit 'em hard, hit 'em where it hurts, and we disappear back into the dunes, bleed 'em dry." The settlement elders, pragmatic and accustomed to survival at all costs, agreed. While not natural warriors, they understood the necessity of decisive action over passive defense. A daring plan began to take shape. The humans, guided by the settlers' knowledge of the treacherous landscape, prepared an ambush site. A winding box canyon with concealed vantage points that overlooks a single narrow entrance designed to nullify the enemy's superior numbers and force them into a choke point. Explosives were laid with brutal efficiency, cobbled together from tech alongside ancient volatile munitions unearthed from the settlement's hidden stores. Krellix's heart, or the closest equivalent in Verilian anatomy, hammered with a mix of warrior's anticipation and a medic's dread. He moved among humans and desert dwellers alike, treating pre-battle jitters, bolstering their resolve with reminders of past victories, and ruthlessly prioritizing those injuries that wouldn't impede their fight. As the enemy force marched into the canyon, their footsteps echoing with the arrogance of anticipated triumph, Krellix crouched beside Ramirez on a ledge high above. Her makeshift rifle, calibrated to account for the unpredictable desert winds with adjustments Krellix had suggested, was trained on the unsuspecting column below. "Remember, aim for commanders. Disrupt their formation," he hissed, a strange echo of his past Verilian self, but now filtered through the raw intensity of this human way of war. "Don't worry, Doc," Ramirez muttered, her voice tight. "I'm going to make every shot count for those we lost back at the outpost." The first explosion ripped through the canyon, a cascade of rock and shrapnel cutting down those in the vanguard. Then, the humans and the desert dwellers unleashed a coordinated barrage from their vantage points. The enemy force, caught by surprise, stumbled, their disciplined ranks shattering. Krellix, scalpel replaced with a blaster, aimed not to kill but to disrupt and disorient. He targeted communication arrays, weapon systems, and anything to tip the balance in favor of the allied ambushers. Yet, even amidst the chaos, his healer's instincts pulsed. A young settlement warrior, swept off her feet by the blast concussion, lay exposed. Without conscious thought, Krellix scrambled out of cover, dodging return fire to shield her with his own carapace and drag her back to safety. Below, the battle raged. Humans, their shouts defiant, moved not in tactical patterns, but in a whirlwind of individual ferocity amplified by the settlers' coordinated attacks. The box canyon became a death trap, echoing with the roar of explosions and battle cries in two unfamiliar tongues united by a single purpose. When the last echoes faded and an eerie silence fell, Krellix found himself staring down at the carnage, a sick feeling settling in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't healing. This was butchery. But even as that coldly analytical part of him catalogued the scene, a more human sense of grim satisfaction surged through him. They had won. Bloodied, depleted, but unbroken. The battle was won, but amidst the acrid smoke and the ringing silence, a different kind of unease settled over Krellix. The enemy wasn't just better equipped than previous forces. They possessed technology that bore an unsettling familiarity. The jagged energy signatures of biomechanical augmentation systems were only whispered about in old Verilian threat assessments. He knelt amidst the wreckage, a sense of foreboding prickling at his carapace. While the humans rejoiced in their victory, digging through the remains for usable salvage, Krellix carefully extracted a shattered datapad. It was a crude field issue, but its telltale glitching pulsed with an aggression that he chillingly recognized. These weren't just opportunistic raiders, but a resurgence of something far more dangerous. "Look at this, Doc!" Private Johnson thrust a scavenged helmet towards him. "I haven't seen armor like this before. It's top quality. A shame it's got its owner's brains splattered all over it." Krellix held the helmet at arm's length. Johnson was right. The workmanship was undeniably superior to the usual makeshift gear their opponents cobbled together. His stomach churned in recognition. These were the markings of a species thought extinct, brutal, technologically advanced, and ruthlessly efficient. Rumors from outposts on the remote fringes of their sector flickered in his mind. Strange sightings, unexplained disappearances, and attacks attributed to new pirate factions with an unusually high success rate. "We need to get this back to the settlement," he declared, his voice clipped. "There's something I need to analyze." Always vigilant despite the post-battle elation, Jake noted the change in his voice. "Problem, Doc?" "It's just something I need to verify," Krellix replied, evading the question. "It's a standard post-engagement analysis." The settlement, usually so guarded, buzzed with a strange energy after their victory. It wasn't a celebration, but a shift in the balance of power. With their unorthodox tactics and lingering battle scent clinging to them, the humans became figures of wary respect. Krellix retreated to his makeshift medical bay, a repurposed dwelling now overflowing with supplies scavenged from the battlefield. The familiar tools of his trade felt foreign amidst the superior yet disturbingly familiar enemy technology. Days turned into a haze of frantic analysis. He dissected the datapad, isolating the energy readings and cross-referencing them against his meager database of Verilian knowledge. The results tightened his thorax. The signatures were a match, not perfect, but a terrifying echo of the species believed to have long been eradicated. He spent sleepless nights combing through historical archives the settlement elders reluctantly granted him access to. He read tales of ancient conflicts, forgotten star systems ravaged by war, and rumors of a bio-augmented species that vanished as quickly and as mysteriously as it arose. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Krellix," Ramirez remarked when Krellix stumbled out of his lab, drawn by the smell of campfire cooking. "Did you find something good in that scrap heap?" "Something," he started, but the words caught in his throat. To reveal his discovery would unleash a new kind of fear, to shatter the Alliance's hard-won confidence. Yet, keeping this knowledge to himself felt like a betrayal he didn't yet understand. His unease must have been evident. Jake appeared soundlessly, a shadow against the fading light. "Spit it out, Doc. You found something, didn't you?" Krellix held the sergeant's gaze, a silent battle of wills. Then he reached into his lab coat and carefully placed the salvaged datapad on the makeshift table. "This," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this changes everything." The flicker of recognition in Jake's eye confirmed his worst fears. And as they stared at the datapad, its sinister energy signature mocking their hard-fought victory, the first scout returned, dust-caked and panting. His words were a death knell. "They're mobilizing. A real army this time, and they're heading straight for us."